Hi guys, Mimi G here of mimigstyle.com, and today we're going to be doing a sew along for my latest pre-fall 2018 Simplicity pattern 8690. Let's get started. Now if you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher course, watch the Sewing Basics video linked in the description box below, then follow along with me. We're going to be using pattern 8690, and we're going to be using a mixture of both view A and view B. We're going to do view A with the sleeves from view B, which is one of the really nice things about this pattern is that you can mix and match which hem you want and which sleeve you want. Remember that in the back of the pattern envelope, along with sizing, you have a list of fabric suggestions along with any notions you're going to need, like an invisible zipper. Let's go over the pattern pieces you're going to need. You're going to need pattern piece number 2, which is the back. You're going to cut out 2. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 1, which is the front of our dress. You're going to cut 1 on the fold. Pattern piece number 10, which is the flounce for the hem, and you're going to cut 2 on the fold. You're going to cut and interface pattern piece number 5 and number 4, which is our front and our back facings. You're going to cut pattern piece number 3, it's our collar and tie, and you're going to cut 2. You're going to cut pattern piece number 12, which is the sleeve flounce, and you're going to cut 2. And last, you're going to cut pattern piece number 11, which is our sleeve, and you're going to cut 2. Okay, once you have everything cut out, grab your invisible zipper and make sure that you have interfaced both your front and your back facings, and we can start sewing. Okay, the very first step is to make your bust darts. So go ahead and do your bust darts. We're going to lay our fronts to back, right sides facing, and we're going to pin at the shoulder and at the side seam. Once you have your shoulders and your side seams pinned, go ahead and stitch down the side seams using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then stitch across both shoulders, also using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you've sewn your side seams and your shoulder seams, go ahead and serge your seam allowances, give it a good press. Now we're going to work on our center back zipper. So we have our invisible zipper. I went ahead and serged the entire center back seams of my dress. I have not sewn the bottom together because I like to do my invisible zipper a little differently. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put right sides facing, and we're going to pin our center back. And you should have a marking where your zipper ends. It was on your pattern piece, so make sure to transfer that over. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing at the bottom of our dress, right, at the hem. We're going to sew up using a regular normal length stitch of 2.5. We're going to get to our marking where our zipper is going to end. We're going to backstitch and break our thread. And then we're going to start again using a basting stitch from where we stopped to the very top. Now before we get started, I'm going to press my zipper. So I'm going to open it up, and the right side of the zipper is facing down. And all I like to do is I like to press my coils open just a bit. So I just sort of open it up with my fingers and then use my iron along the tape. And you're going to do that for both sides. Okay, we're going to start, like I said, at the hem of the dress. We're going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. We're using a 2.5 length stitch. Okay, I am at the point where the zipper is going to end, so I'm going to backstitch. And I'm going to cut my thread. And I'm going to change my stitch to a basting stitch, and I'm not going to backstitch. Now I want you to go ahead and press your seam open. Okay, I have my seams pressed open, and I am working only on one seam allowance. The entire dress is to the left of me, I'm going to place my zipper right side towards my dress, and I'm going to try and keep the center of my zipper along my seam line. Now, I always use an extra long zipper. I get asked this all the time. I use an extra long zipper because I like to keep the zipper pull out of the way, and I just find it a lot easier to work with a longer zipper and then cut off what I don't need. Now, I'm going to keep my regular presser foot on my machine for now. I'm going to just baste this down one side. And again, just make sure that the center of your zipper is along your seam line. Now I'm going to turn this over, making sure that the dress is to the left of me, and I'm only working on one seam allowance. You don't want to stitch on your dress. You're going to do the same thing up the other side. Now, using my seam ripper, I'm going to open up my center back seam just until we get to where we backstitched, right? We're only removing the basting stitch. And then open up your zipper. Okay, now you're going to try and get your zipper pulled to the inside of the dress. And again, this is why I use a really long zipper, because this will stay completely out of the way as I'm sewing. Now go ahead and switch from your regular presser foot to your zipper foot. Okay, now using a normal length stitch, I'm starting at the bottom of the zipper and I'm going to work my way up, and you want to be close to your zipper teeth, but make sure you don't stitch on your zipper teeth. Backstitch. This is why it's helpful to press your zipper teeth out a little bit to make it easier to sew along that little ridge. And now we're going to start on the other side at the top, working our way down. Now you can go ahead and close your zipper. And now you have an invisible zipper. Okay, once you've done your invisible zipper, if done correctly, you should not see the zipper. It should be, in fact, invisible. Now we're gonna set this aside and we're gonna work on our collar and tie. So what we're gonna do is we're going to grab one, and with right sides facing, we're going to fold it in half. And you should have markings that you transferred onto your collar so that we know where we're starting and stopping our stitching. So I'm going to put a pin just to remind myself of where to start and stop, and then continue pinning the rest of your collar. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along the closing here. This is going to be at our center back. And then we're obviously leaving this space open, so we're going to start stitching at our large dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to stitch along the long end and then across the diagonal end. And you're going to do the same thing for both your collar pieces. Okay, first we're going to close out our short end. Remember, we're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end. And then we're starting at our large dot. Again, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch. You're going to sew your other collar and tie the same way. Okay, now we're going to turn our collar and tie over. So where you have that large dot, you're going to clip until you get to your stitching, but not through your stitching. And then we're going to turn our tie right side out. I'm going to trim my corner just a bit. Okay, you're going to point out your corners, and you're going to make sure that where you snipped, you pull that seam allowance up. and you're going to give this a nice press. You're going to do this to the other collar and tie. Okay, we're going to go ahead and attach our collar tie to our neckline. So you're going to start by placing the finished edge at your center back, and you should have marks, notches, dots to help you know exactly where to match everything up. You should have a small dot that aligns to your shoulder seam. And you should have another dot where you're going to pin the end of your tie. And so you'll see that we have this sort of dip where we had our seam allowance up. The rest of it is obviously on the inside of our tie, which is now finished. And we're going to stitch down from the center back to our large dot. Okay, I'm going to start at my large dot, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end. I'm going to stitch down the other side. Okay, I went ahead and stitched my back facings to my front facing at the shoulder, pressed my seams open, and I serged the outer edge of my facing. Now we're going to go ahead and pin it to our neckline. Make sure that the collar is facing down and you're looking at your seam allowance. And you're just going to pin. Make sure to open out the zipper part. Match up your shoulder seams. Once you have it pinned in place, go ahead to your sewing machine and stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance, and now we're going to do some understitching. So I'm making sure that my seam allowance is facing my facing. And we're going to stitch close to the edge. And now we're going to go ahead and close our facing at the center back. So put your facing back down, and we're going to stitch close to the edge. Make sure you don't stitch through your zipper teeth. Trim your corner. You're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we're going to move on to the flounce of our hem. I want you to lay your two pieces right sides facing, and you're going to stitch both sides down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do that, we'll go ahead and attach it to our dress. Okay, I went ahead and serged my seam allowances, and I also serged the bottom of my dress because I'm just going to do one quick fold over and stitch. But we're going to go ahead and pin this to our dress. So with right sides facing, I'm just going to slip this over my dress, match up my side seams, and I'm going to pin. And you have notches, so make sure that you're aligning your notches as well. Okay, now that you have it pinned, go ahead, go to the sewing machine and stitch around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I went ahead and attached my flounce and I serged my seam allowances. I'm going to set this aside for just a second. Grab your sleeve and your sleeve flounce. First, we're going to do our sleeve, the upper part of our sleeve, so I want you to fold it in half with right sides facing. Go ahead and stitch your underarm seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do that for both your sleeves. Okay, now that you've sewn your underarm seam, I went ahead and made 2 rows of easing stitch for my sleeve cap, and then I made 2 rows of gathering stitches along the flounce so that we can gather it and attach it to our sleeve. So with right sides facing, just fold your flounce in half and then go ahead and stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, then serge your seam allowance and serge the hem of your flounce. Okay, now go ahead and grab your 2 threads and start pulling and gathering your fabric. I like to sort of eyeball measure it. Okay, then with right sides facing, you're gonna go ahead and slip it over your sleeve. Align your underarm seam to the seam that's on your flounce and pin. And you should have a notch. So if you marked your notches, align your notches. Now go ahead to your sewing machine, stitch all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once your flounce is attached to your sleeve, you're gonna go ahead and pin it to your dress. So with right sides facing, I like to start by aligning my underarm seams. And then I align my single notch with my single notch and my double notch with my double notch. And then I have a little notch that I marked where my shoulder seam is. And now you can use your easing stitches to sort of pull or let go as much as you need to make your sleeve cap fit. If you're not marking your notches and you don't mark your little dots, it makes it much harder to ease in your sleeve cap evenly. Okay, once you have your sleeve pinned in, you can go ahead and stitch around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, we're gonna back stitch the beginning and at the end. Attach your other sleeve the same way and serge your seam allowance. All right, all that's left for you to do is to do the hem of your sleeve flounce and of your dress, and then hand sew on your hook and eye for the back, and you are all done. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Please make sure and follow me on Instagram at MimiGStyle and use the hashtags #MimiGTutorials or #MimiGPatterns. Until next time, peace.